lead in a way that's collaborative in style, that brings the best out of their people.
Well, good morning and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. It's a beautiful Monday morning here in Las Vegas. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. I think it's going to be a really interesting session this time. We have a gentleman who I've just met actually literally a couple minutes ago, but his name is Professor Jonathan Westover, and he is a professor at the Utah Valley University, but his specialty is on organizational leadership, and he's a best-selling author, and he's really been involved in the leadership arena in terms of teaching, advising, and setting up curriculum, and most importantly, really looking at how do you bring up the next generation of leaders, which I think is very important. Folks like me with gray hair, we've done our bit, and hopefully we continue to fight the good fight for leadership. But we need that next generation of leaders. So, Jonathan, thank you for being on our podcast and welcome. And I really appreciate you taking your time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So I guess to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background so our audience knows who you are, and how you got into the position that you're in now.
Yeah, so I consider myself a scholar practitioner. I am a full professor in the organizational leadership department at Utah Valley University. I'm chair of that department as well. And I teach organizational development and change management, leadership, HR, OB, ethics types of courses. And I've been at UVU now for 13 plus years, and it has been a blast. So in addition to the traditional professorial work that I do, I teach courses, I do a lot of academic research, and serve on a lot of boards and, academic organizations and such. I also do consulting work with my firm, Human Capital Innovations, which I started back in 2007. And, part of the reason for that is I really have a strong belief in the necessity really for us to not just get stuck in our ivory towers of academia, where we do good, important research and we extend our scientific knowledge around these really complicated people issues, right? That's super important. I'm a big believer in it, and I do a lot of work in that space, but I need to be able to communicate those findings, that research, to leaders and those who lead organizations, who manage people, because ultimately that's where it's going to have the greatest impact. So, I made a conscious choice. I've been doing the consulting work for a long time on the side, but I made a conscious choice several years ago that I was going to put extra time and focus on this practitioner-oriented translation of the scientific research that I do, that other people do, in order to help people managers, organizational leaders across the world to be more effective, have better impact on their teams. And that was really the genesis, the origins of some of the books that I put out in the last year. I've published, I don't know, upwards of 100 or so academic articles. I've published, I don't know, probably around 15 academic books and edited works. But it's almost a year ago exactly that I published my first practitioner-focused, practitioner-oriented book, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership. And then over the summer, I published my second book, Bluer Than Indigo Leadership. Again, both of these take the research, but they put it into a really accessible format, and it's practitioner-oriented. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun ride, and having the opportunity to share some of my insights throughout my career, throughout my consulting work, throughout all the research that I've done, to an audience that's going to be able to use it. So that's my hope. I want to have work with impact, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and it's also a very important point you make there about the actual practitioner. And so as you've, obviously the academia, kind of is there. But as you've gone into the consulting work and you've gone into different companies, are you seeing any commonalities in terms of what are the things that need fixing, or what are the things that you're seeing in different enterprises, big, small, medium, whatever, that are maybe commonalities within the leadership realm that you think probably needs to be fixed, or what are the disconnects?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many commonalities. And honestly, nothing I present in my books is like super new.
Sure,
There
sure.
we much of what we know about effective leadership, we've known for a long time. The question is, can we do it effectively? Can we do it consistently in a sustainable way? And so that's something I try to focus on as I convey concepts, is that we need to take a holistic, people centric, holistic systems approach to managing teams, leading organizations, and being effective. And that requires a sustainability mentality, that requires a long-term orientation. And if I'm only focused on, the putting out the fires here and now, if I'm only focused on making payroll this pay period, if I'm only focused on quarterly earnings reports, all of those are important. All of those are necessary. I have to, of course, do my job and make sure we're taking care of our people and getting products and services out. But if that's all I'm focused on, then I'm not going to be an effective leader, and I'm really undercutting both my ability to be effective, but I'm undercutting my own organization's ability to continue to add value to the market. And what will inevitably happen when you have organizations that are predominantly run by leaders that have that short-term orientation is they make sacrifices, unnecessary sacrifices, and they cut corners in ways that undermine their with the consumer, with their people, and ultimately their short-term gains are to the sacrifice and the detriment of their long-term sustainability. So that's something I speak to constantly. And there are so many other leadership competencies and capabilities that are kind of embedded within
Sure.
that kind of big picture approach, the holistic approach, the systems approach, and the sustainability kind of a mindset. But I would say that's perhaps one of the most important things, because ultimately most leaders in organizations are well-intentioned. Most leaders in organizations want to do well. They want to perform well. They want their teams to perform well. They don't know how, and they spend the vast majority of their time just running around like chickens with their heads cut off, just putting out fires, rather than being purposeful, strategic, and preparing for future success.
Yeah, I think you're right, 100%. You mentioned mindset. It's been my experience that you're right, and I haven't met any people in leadership positions for the most part that have nefarious reasons for being there, right? But part of what I've found out, I've experienced, maybe you can opine on this, is that number one, they don't necessarily have the mindset for what leadership means. Leadership means taking care of your team first. You come second, right? I mean, that's kind of a mindset that you have to have, and everything else kind of flows after that. The other thing is that I found out there are some folks that get into leadership positions because they're subject matter experts. They're the best engineer, or they're the best this, best that. Say, let's go get Joe or Jane and put them in this position. They may not want to be a leader, or they may think that as you described it, leadership is getting the job done, which is a big part of it, but it's not the most important part of it. So I think the mindset piece is spot on from what you said, right?
Yeah, I do, and I agree. There's what I discuss in my books and many of the articles I write for Forbes or different HR.com magazines or some of the other outlets I've written for. A lot of the times it comes down to various types of mindsets, like a futures thinking mindset, or a design thinking mindset, or a systems thinking mindset, or growth mindset, an abundance mindset, right? Like these are the types of things we have to train ourselves to slow down, take a step back, and approach the world in a way that will allow us to have long-term sustainable success. And if we're just being reactionary, of, there's only so much we can do being
Right.
reactionary. Even the
Yeah.
most productive, the smartest among us, there's only so much you can do if you're just constantly reacting to the environment around you. Now, of course, we all have to be reactive. We all have to be able to pivot. We all have to be able to respond to external environments and be able to make adjustments. Of course we do. But if that's all we're doing, then we're allowing others to dictate what we do rather than dictating our own possible futures.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a message. I'm glad that you're out there, presenting this to different enterprises. One of the things I remember at Microsoft is it depends on what vertical you are in, right? So if you're in one particular organization and they really care about leadership development, they'll go ahead and do some work in that area. Other areas not. So it wasn't a holistic kind of enterprise-wide. This is how we're going to tackle leadership development. It's very siloed, and so you had a very disjointed kind of approach. So I think you're right. I haven't seen a lot of companies that kind of approach it that way. I hope you're seeing more companies that kind of are accepting that instead of the flavor of the year, because there was always like, okay, we're going to do this leadership thing this year because of this particular issue. Then next year we do it for this particular issue, but there's nothing kind of tying all that together holistically in a strategic way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think as I think about the competencies and capabilities needed in the future of work, as I consider the rapid um, technological adjustments that we're undergoing, disruptive transformations through technology, as we look at issues like the pandemic and how that has accelerated us into a new world of work. It's changed the expectations that employees have for their employers, and how they want to be led, how they expect to be led, and how they expect, what they expect the experience of work to be like in the first place. So much of that was already shifting over the last decade or so, and because of the pandemic, it's just skyrocketed further in that direction, and I don't see us going back. We might have a little bit of pendulum swing, but we're not going back to the way it was before. And the clear trajectory was already in the direction that we've seen ourselves go in the last 2 years. So we need just different competencies in leadership positions than we did, a generation ago. I think of the old psychological contract in the workplace between employer and employee, that essentially doesn't even exist anymore. A couple generations ago, you get out of school, you go work for a company, they provide you with the job and the benefits and the retirement. They give you a career pathway, and most people spent the vast majority of their time, their career, at that organization, working their way up. That just doesn't exist. I mean, it really hasn't existed for a long time, but in recent years in particular, it goes both ways. Employers don't really provide that kind of a long-term career atmosphere for most employees, and most employees frankly don't want to stay with the same organization. And so that kind of unspoken psychological agreement between employer and employee has shifted dramatically. Employees now, they want more flexibility. And in fact, younger millennial and Gen Z workers, many of them simply, they just want to be their own boss. They want to be digital nomads. They want to, they're joining these various platforms to be able to connect with the gig economy and rent out their talent to organizations, rather than taking a traditional, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 kind of a position. We're seeing that just more and more and more. And so what does that mean when I'm a leader now, renting talent from across the globe rather than having all the talent in-house? What does that mean when I have a distributed workforce where even my full-time employees aren't in the office and we're all scattered all over the place and we're trying to work effectively together and collaborate and innovate? What does it mean when I'm trying to, have a healthy, dynamic culture within my organization or within my team, and we aren't even together in person? These are all the types of questions that leaders are asking themselves, and we have to be able to respond to in a increasingly hyper competitive, uncertain and incredibly messy global economy and labor market, right? Like this is the reality that
Right.
we're in, and it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. So we need leaders that are prepared to confront the complexities, the messiness, the nuances, and the uncertainty, and leaders that are prepared to not to lead in a way that's collaborative in style, that brings the best out of their people, that's developmental, that where I, as a leader, I'm helping my people become their best possible selves, fulfilling their potential and adding value to the team. That's the type of leader we need. And frankly, a generation ago or more, that wasn't the type of leader we had. We had leaders who were more authoritarian, autocratic, control, command,
Yeah.
style, and that isn't going to work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to see the shift, right? And you've got baby boomers like me that are still in positions of leadership that are probably wrestling with this because you're right. They grew up under one style of leadership. They're seeing things shift around them. How fast can they pivot? How fast can they, kind of adapt this new kind of workplace environment with the new demographics coming up? So that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. As you're looking at, the students that you teach, and and you see obviously different demographic, different mindset, different skill sets. Are you hopeful about the future in terms of leaders that will eventually step into the breach and take over? Uh,
I am. I think much of the generational divide we see, where we see a gap between leadership style, expectations of employees, and then younger workers and their style, their expectations for their leaders. There is a significant gap in many organizations, and a large part of that gap, it's not just generational, certainly, and I don't want to perpetuate this idea of baby boomers and and people of that generation necessarily having a completely negative, antiquated approach to their leadership and how they deal with younger employees. Because that's not fair, and that's not certainly
sure,
not exclusively the case. But there is a large disconnect at times, in part just because of different lived experiences, right? Older employees, older leaders, they started their career in a very different context, in a very different environment, and what it took to be successful then is different than what it's going to be successful now. And what I see with my students and with younger workers is they have very high expectations for leaders. They've gone to school, they understand the principles of effective leadership, they understand how organizations should be running, and then they get out there in the workforce and they realize that most leaders don't know what the crap they're doing. Most
yeah,
organizations are a pile of dysfunction, and they're not willing to put up with garbage leadership. They're not willing to put up with a bad work environment, and that's part of why we're seeing this great resignation, is people just saying, no, I'm not putting up with it. So I think part of it is the younger generation, they have a clear understanding of what it's going to take to be effective. Now, will they be effective just because they understand what it takes? Not necessarily. Obviously, they have to be able to translate that into practice.
sure.
But I'm very hopeful that I think the younger generation is aware of what it's going to take. I believe they're interested in stepping into the opportunity, and I think all the mindsets that I was talking about earlier, they're often mindsets that are coming more and more naturally to younger workers, younger leaders, younger students. So for all those reasons, it's not going to be an easy transition, certainly. But I am hopeful, and I'm a believer that that we'll have a good handoff of the baton
Yeah.
from older generations of leaders to the younger generations of leaders. That will continue to happen, and I think we're gonna be in for a fun ride.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%, and I really appreciate your thoughts on this. I think it's very insightful to our audience just to think about these things like the Great Resignation and what are what's causing all this, and what is the workplace going to look like now and into the future. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you? If they need your services, they want to need some consultation.
Yeah, you can look me up on LinkedIn, Jonathan H. Westover. I pop right up. And my firm is Human Capital Innovation. So if you just do a Google search, it'll pop right up. The URL is actually innovativehumancapital.com. Check out my books, check out my podcast, the Human Capital Innovations podcast. We have, about 85,000 listeners across 140 plus countries. And it's been a lot of fun, mostly interviewing industry professionals, executives, thought leaders, that sort. That's most of what the episodes are, and would encourage you to check those out and check out Human Capital Innovations website for the services we offer. And there's a whole bunch of free resources that are there in terms of research reports, briefs, one sheets, things that are very practitioner oriented and really focus on giving you tips on what you can start doing now today to be more effective.
Excellent. I appreciate that. So for those of you listening, if you need Professor Westover's services, please avail yourself of his services. And thank you for your insights. Thank you for taking the time to be on our podcast. Those of you who are listening to the podcast, please tell your friends about it. Hit the subscribe button, and certainly we'll give you some feedback. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.